Welcome to my video on what's wrong with Ibram X. Kendi. This will be our text for the day, a young adult novel called Stamped. But before we begin, let me tell you, I imagine Ibram X. Kendi is a wonderful father and husband and son and brother and friend. I've seen him interviewed. He seems like a very nice man. He's wrong, and he's badly wrong, and he's telling kids bad stuff. So I want to correct him, but I don't think that makes him bad. So if you're here because you have to read this book for school, you've come to the wrong place. We're only going to look at a couple of pages. In fact, in this episode, we're only going to look at 2 pages. So go somewhere else. Otherwise, if you've never read this book, and you love history and you love reading, don't read this book. Read this book. So let me tell you quickly, Ibram X. Kendi, I think, graduated around 2010. He was working for some small colleges. He wrote this book in 2016, and oh my gosh, it won the National Book Award. It made him famous. He got a job at the American University in Washington, D.C., and later now Boston University. He wrote this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is now canonical. But then he decided that this book, which is thick, right, lots of little words, and a ton of footnotes, he thought, I want kids. I want to make a book like this for kids. So he got this young adult writer named Jason Reynolds, and they wrote this book, and it's not so many words, but it's for people who don't like to read and who don't like history, which wasn't me in middle school. I would have much preferred this book, I think, when I was in 8th grade. Anyway, let's begin. So I'm going to break this down to 2 things I don't like about him. Today we're going to talk about the thing I don't like about he rejects the idea of assimilation, and I think it's absolutely important. When you come to America, you got to assimilate. You come from some poor country, you got to assimilate, and he seems to think that this is wrong. So I want to read to you a chapter. Look, it's only this big. This is why this is a good book for young adults who don't like to read. So, chapter 9, page 65, Uplift Persuasion. This is a short chapter. Imagine it as a parenthetical, a side note, just so you know. Black people, slaves, started to get free, runaways, and abolitionists urged the newly freed people to go to church regularly, to learn to speak proper English, learn math, adopt trades, get married, stay away from vices, smoking and drinking, and basically live what they would consider to be respectable lives. Basically, live like white people. If black people behaved admirably, they could prove all the stereotypes about them were wrong. So there's 2 things going on. First, you need to assimilate, live like white people, because that's going to be important for you. But also, there's a second thing, and let me just go ahead and continue reading. This strategy was called Uplift Persuasion, and I think he made this up, Ibram X. Kendi, this term, Uplift Persuasion. It was racist because it said that black people couldn't be accepted as themselves, that they had to fit in to some kind of white mold to deserve their freedom. But in the 1790s, Uplift Persuasion was working, at least it seemed to be. It's important you keep this in mind, you the reader, because it would be the cornerstone of assimilationist thought. This is evil, according to him. Which basically said, and then I like the way he does this, make yourself small, make yourself unthreatening, make yourself the same, make yourself safe, make yourself quiet, to make white people comfortable with your existence. So, Uplift Persuasion has two things. First, you need to assimilate, and that assimilation will also help white people to accept you. And he thinks this is racist and wrong. Now, I'm going to read to you, I actually have it printed out here, and this comes from this book. This comes from his original book. And I want you to listen to this. I think this is crazy. I think what he's about to say is absolutely crazy. Listen to what he says. You can read along. The confines of enslavement were producing black people who were intellectually, psychologically, culturally, and behaviorally different, not inferior. This is page 98. I want you to listen to what he's saying is slavery made people different, not inferior. And the answer is no. Slavery was making people inferior. It's bad. Slavery was bad. And this is how I think about it. Imagine for a moment you were a slave and you escaped and you got to New York, and someone, a good Quaker merchant, gave you 40 acres and a mule and some extra money and some a community outside of Buffalo. What would have to happen? Well, you would have to change. You can't be a slave anymore. You can't do that slave sort of stuff. Slaves didn't work hard. They tried their hardest to get out of work. They didn't follow the rules if they could get away with it, right? There were only the master's rules. So if you could trick master, this was a good thing. You don't follow rules. You don't work hard. You don't worry about what's going to happen next year. That's not your business. You just live for the day. If you can find a chicken that doesn't belong to you but belongs to master, and you can somehow or another get it, well, you take it, for crying out loud. See, these are all this behavior and psychology and culture that's inferior if you want to be a free person in upper state New York. You're going to have to change your way of living. I used to have this argument about the culture of Amazonian Amerindians, right? Those people who lived in the Amazon Stone Age people, and I said that their culture is inferior. And if you said, Mr. Horn, but it helped them survive in the Amazon, the answer is yes. I'm sorry. If you live in the Amazon and you're naked, you want to have the Amazonian culture. That's probably true. But if you live in America, you're going to have to change, kids. You're going to have to assimilate. We don't do that. We have a different way of living. And I think if you're today, let's pretend that you live in Houston, let's say in the 5th Ward, and you live in poverty, and your parents have lived in poverty, and your grandparents have lived in poverty, and you haven't done well in school, and you have never had a job, and so you've never learned what it takes to have a job. Well, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to assimilate into the world of American, either going to college or getting a job. It's a very different world. It has nothing to do with being Indian or black or white. It has to do with how you make your way through this world. Now, again, I don't understand how, it's puzzling to me how anyone would say no, assimilation is racist. That doesn't make any sense. Now, the other part, that if black people don't assimilate, or that black people must assimilate so white people will accept them. My thought is, well, in 1830, you need white people to agree that slavery is wrong. How do you think you're going to end slavery? I guess you can try a slave overthrow like Haiti did, but I don't think that's going to work. We know, of course, a civil war happens, but without the Civil War, how are you going to end slavery? Well, you're going to have to argue that slaves can work hard even if they're not slaves. As freemen, they can work just as hard, because that's what's going to have to happen if you're going to free the slaves. Otherwise, we'll have a whole bunch of very poor people who don't work hard, and the South's not going to go for that. Now, jump forward to 1930s, where the South has segregated black people. If you want to get rid of segregation, you're going to have to convince white people that black people can work hard, can become part of America and the American way of life. And oh my gosh, if you watch the films of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and early 1960s, and you see the difference between those young civil rights college kids who came down, the black kids who came down, and black kids from the South. Oh, how much more articulate, how much more civilized are they than the white folk around them, the white sheriffs around them. They seem like hicks. Is that what helped America pass the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965? I think so. I think that helped. I think Uplift Persuasion is actually powerful and does help. I've run out of time. I want to talk about something else in the next lecture, which is how Ibram X. Kendi wants to change America. I think that's a terrible idea. Okay.